As the threat of tariffs looms over the Canadian economy, more people are doing what they can to buy Canadian. Topping the list is food. But as you may have noticed yourself, it's easier said than done. CTV's Heather Wright spoke with shoppers in Toronto to find out how they are handling it.
Picking out her canned tomatoes, Peggy Chambers made sure that she was checking the labels and buying Canadian.
I approached it cautiously because I am very aware of what's happening politically.
Buying as many Canadian products as she can is more important than ever for her because of the threats made by U.S. President Donald Trump that he'll impose a 25% tariff on Canadian-made goods starting February 1st. Chambers wants to make her voice heard in the grocery aisle.
Looking at things, whether it's made in Canada, as long as it's not made in the States, you think you're safe.
A long shopping list is being shared widely online, naming popular grocery items, some made in the U.S. against other Canadian-made options. Things like soft drinks, condiments, snack foods like potato chips, telling consumers to look for homegrown brands. It's not known who started the list. Food analysts say a list like this can be a helpful place to start, but some American companies use Canadian.
The trade war just got personal. As Trump's tariffs hit Canada, furious consumers are fighting back, boycotting U.S. goods, canceling trips, and stripping American liquor from store shelves. With billions at stake and tensions at an all-time high, could this be the biggest economic showdown between the two nations yet?
Trump has said he could impose 25% tariffs on Canadian goods, and that has some shoppers here thinking twice about what they buy at the grocery store and which brands they are supporting. CTV's Kimberly Johnson joins us now on this. Kimberly.
Patricia, many shoppers I spoke to today say that they are thinking more and more about what they are putting in their cart, putting a renewed focus on Canadian-made goods. But one expert says it can be a bit more complicated than that because of how closely our two countries often work together to get things into your fridge.
The United States and Canada have long enjoyed a robust trade partnership. In 2023, bilateral trade between the two countries totaled over $700 billion, with Canada being the largest export market for 34 U.S. states. However, this relationship has been strained by recent developments. President Trump has repeatedly threatened to impose sweeping tariffs on Canadian imports. In January 2025, he signed an executive order imposing a 25% tariff on most Canadian goods and a 10% tariff on Canadian energy exports. These tariffs were temporarily paused for 30 days following negotiations, but the threat remains. Adding fuel to the fire, Trump has repeatedly suggested that Canada should become the 51st state of the United States. This proposal has been met with widespread rejection in Canada. Trump has claimed, "We don't need anything they have. We have unlimited energy, should make our own cars, and have more lumber than we can ever use. Without this massive subsidy, Canada ceases to exist as a viable country." In response to these threats, the Canadian government has taken a firm stance. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced retaliatory tariffs on $155 billion worth of U.S. imports, a larger amount than initially expected. In a televised address, Trudeau stated, "We didn't ask for this, but we will not back down." The Canadian government's response has extended beyond tariffs. There have been calls for national unity and a renewed focus on Canadian sovereignty. This sentiment has resonated with the public, leading to the rise of a Buy Canadian movement.
The Buy Canadian movement has become a huge force in the last week alone, changing how and where people shop.
A vast amount of people are only purchasing made in Canada products.
Grocery store owners like Marilyn Dibb are astounded by just how quickly Canadians have dumped American products in the wake of President Donald Trump's tariff threats.
They are completely boycotting the American-made product.
And at the Canada-US border, officials are reporting a huge drop in southbound traffic at some ports of entry. In Blaine, Washington, near Vancouver, wait times were just 5 minutes, down from the usual 19 minutes on a Sunday, let alone Super Bowl Sunday. All of that has some U.S. lawmakers furious with the president.
It unnecessarily harms a relationship with Canada that's been such a good relationship.
Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear says Canadian demand for bourbon has dropped off in the wake of Trump's aggression.
Most Americans didn't vote for the president on these issues. They don't view Canada in the way that he does.
Neighboring Illinois does big business with Canada too. It sent $30 billion worth of goods north last year. A lot of it was food.
Social media campaigns promoting Canadian products have gained traction. Hashtags like Boycott USA and Buy Canadian are trending on platforms like grassroots boycotts of U.S. products have sprung up across the country, with Canadians sharing lists of American brands to avoid. The government has actively encouraged this shift in consumer behavior. Prime Minister Trudeau urged Canadians to choose Canada in their purchasing decisions. He suggested,
it might mean checking the labels at the supermarket and picking Canadian-made products. It might mean opting for Canadian rye over Kentucky bourbon, or foregoing Florida orange juice altogether.
Provincial governments have also taken action. Several provinces, including Ontario, British Columbia, Manitoba, Newfoundland and Labrador, and Nova Scotia, have announced the removal of U.S. alcohol products from their government-run liquor stores. Ontario Premier Doug Ford stated, every year, LCBO sells nearly $1 billion worth of American wine, beer, spirits, and seltzers. Not anymore. The impact of this consumer shift is being felt across various industries. In the alcohol sector, the removal of U.S. products from provincial liquor stores has led to a noticeable change in consumer habits. Canadian alternatives are seeing increased demand as consumers seek out domestic options. The food and grocery industry is also experiencing changes. There's an increased focus on local produce and Canadian-made products. Major grocery chains are prominently featuring Canadian-made goods and expanding their local offerings. Some stores have even created dedicated Made in Canada sections to cater to this growing demand.
With the prospect of a 25% tariff on Canadian goods still hanging in the air, Canadians are being urged to find ways to shop Canadian. But who has time to look at all the labels? So we asked Barb Hill here at Lakeview Market in Kelowna to show us some Canadian products we can throw in the cart. What do we got here in terms of things people can see probably in most stores that are Canadian made? What do we got?
Rogers flour. A lot of stores also carry the Fresh is Best, which is out of Kamloops, BC. They have a salsa and chips.
And this other option here as well, La Cochina, also Canadian made.
Yes.
And also Primo, common brand, made in Canada.
Yeah.
What else we got here?
Little Creek salad dressing has been around forever, decades. The Dennison family's been making that in the Okanagan. Sort of inspired all of these other younger local companies to make sauces. But Kent was also showing me that, pancake and waffle mix made in Alberta.
Sweet.
Tourism is another sector feeling the effects of the trade tensions. There's been a marked decline in Canadian travel to the United States. Jason Dale, a Canadian who had planned a family vacation to Tennessee, canceled the trip due to the political climate. He explained, the rhetoric about tariffs, the mockery of our prime minister, and the musing about us becoming the 51st state, that did it for all of us. Everyone was in agreement that we're not going. We're going to keep our money in our own country. As Canadians reconsider their travel plans, there's been a corresponding boost in domestic tourism. Canadian destinations are seeing increased interest as people opt to explore their own country rather than cross the border.
It might mean changing your summer vacation plans to stay here in Canada and explore the many national and provincial parks, historical sites, and tourist destinations our great country has to offer.
The economic implications of this consumer shift are significant. In the short term, some Canadian businesses are benefiting from increased domestic demand. However, there are concerns about potential price increases and supply chain disruptions. The Bank of Canada has warned that a protracted trade conflict would lead to a permanent decline in Canada's GDP level. According to the minutes of a policy decision meeting, Governing Council members also noted that the adverse impact on the level of GDP would be permanent, and the growth of GDP would be reduced until the Canadian economy adjusts to the tariffs. Some economists forecast that if U.S. tariffs were imposed, they could drive the Canadian economy into recession within 5 to 6 months. Significant job losses would also be expected, including up to 100,000 in Quebec alone, according to that province's leader. For U.S. companies reliant on the Canadian market, the impact could be substantial. The United States Travel Association has warned that just a 10% reduction in Canadian travel would result in $2.1 billion in lost spending and 14,000 job losses in the U.S. This situation is unfolding within a broader geopolitical context. Canada is actively working to diversify its trade partnerships. There's been increased focus on strengthening ties with the European Union. The Canada-European Union Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, or CETA, has already removed 98% of tariffs between Canada and the EU. Some have even speculated about the possibility of Canada joining the European Union. The Toronto Star ran a headline asking, "Donald Trump drives a wedge between Canada and the U.S. with a trade war. Could we join the EU?" While this remains unlikely, it reflects the desire for alternatives to U.S. trade dominance. Canadian officials are also exploring other international markets to reduce dependence on the United States.
It ran with the headline, "Donald Trump drives a wedge between Canada and the U.S. with a trade war. Could we join the EU?" And it's not only the Toronto Star. The Economist has been pondering why Canada should join the EU. Europe needs space and resources. Canada needs people. Let's deal.
Public opinion in Canada towards the U.S. has shifted dramatically. A recent Angus Reid Institute analysis found that the proportion of Canadians saying they are very proud of their country jumped by 10 percentage points between December and February. The percentage of people who said they want Canada to join the U.S. dropped from 6% to 4%. This shift in consumer behavior and public opinion has implications for North American economic integration. The long-standing assumption of harmonious trade relations between the U.S. and Canada has been shaken, potentially leading to a rethinking of continental economic strategies. Canadian consumers are grappling with the practical challenges of avoiding U.S. products. Colleen Whale, a Canadian consumer, expressed concerns about potential backlash. "If I show my Canadianism just by the way I speak, is that going to put a target on my back?" Others are finding it difficult to completely eliminate U.S. goods from their lives, given the deep integration of the two economies. Businesses on both sides of the border are adapting to this new reality. Canadian companies are increasingly emphasizing their national identity in marketing campaigns. There's been a rise in Canadian-made labeling and advertising, with companies proudly showcasing their local roots. U.S. companies, meanwhile, are devising strategies to retain Canadian customers. Some are highlighting their long-standing presence in Canada or emphasizing their contributions to the Canadian economy. Others are exploring ways to localize their supply chains or partner with Canadian firms to maintain their market share. The impact of these trade tensions extends beyond consumer goods. Canada is also America's largest foreign supplier of crude oil, natural gas, electricity, and several commodities essential to America's industrial and defense sectors. Prime Minister Trudeau hinted that Canada could, if pressed, reassess U.S. access to such commodities, although he emphasized that he did not wish to escalate the dispute. Looking to the future, several scenarios for U.S.-Canada trade relations are possible. A resolution to the current tensions could lead to a normalization of trade relations. However, there's also the possibility of a protracted trade war, which could have far-reaching consequences for both economies. The long-term sustainability of the Buy Canadian movement remains to be seen. While patriotic fervor is high at the moment, economic realities may eventually temper some of the more extreme boycott efforts. However, the experience has prompted many Canadians to reconsider their consumption habits and prioritize domestic products where possible. The broader implications for global trade patterns are significant. The U.S.-Canada trade dispute underscores the fragility of long-standing trade relationships in an era of rising economic nationalism. Other countries are watching closely, potentially reassessing their own trade dependencies and strategies. Canadian political commentator Sean Mallon noted the historical context of this situation.
There are substantial trade barriers between and among provinces as well, so it's been an issue that's gone on for decades and suddenly is without much improvement, and suddenly a lot of discussion about how to improve those as well.
The current trade tensions have also sparked discussions about reducing internal trade barriers within Canada, as Malin pointed out.
Joining the EU, well, I can't say that it's anywhere top of the agenda right now, but we live in odd times, don't we?
Yeah, we do live in odd times. Yeah, you could put it that way, yeah. You know that the president, U.S. President Donald Trump, he has proposed Canada become the 51st U.S. state. Is there any appetite, Sean? Is there any appetite in Canada for that happening?
The situation has also led to a surge in Canadian nationalism, which, as Malin said,
that much. People waving the flag more, a whole raft of Buy Canadian initiatives in grocery stores. And
as this situation continues to evolve, it's clear that the landscape of U.S. Canada economic relations is changing. The once unshakable assumption of harmonious trade between these neighbors has been challenged, leading to a period of uncertainty and adjustment for businesses and consumers on both sides of the border. The impact extends beyond economics, touching on issues of national identity and sovereignty. Canadians have long assumed that the U.S. would never deliberately seek to harm Canada. That assumption was shattered over the weekend. The situation also shows the unique nature of the U.S. Canada relationship. As Pierre Trudeau, father of the current Prime Minister, once said,
Canada living next to the United States is like sleeping next to an elephant, in which you feel every twitch and shudder on the elephant's part, no matter how well-meaning it might be. And
the current tensions have certainly brought this metaphor to life, with Canadians feeling every twitch and shudder of their powerful neighbors' trade policies. The implications of this trade dispute extend far beyond the immediate economic impact. It raises fundamental questions about the nature of international alliances, the resilience of long-standing partnerships, and the potential for economic nationalism to reshape global trade patterns. As Ramal Mostafa, director of the Lawrence National Center for Policy and Management, said, "We may want to revise our expectations. Instead of a temporary trade dispute followed by a new agreement, we could face a protracted trade war. What once seemed like a short-lived disruption may now be a fundamental shift. This is what keeps me up at night." The situation has also sparked a debate about Canada's place in the world and its reliance on the United States. Some are calling for a more diversified approach to international trade and diplomacy. Romel Mostafa further added, "This crisis has united Canadians. This is a pivotal moment. We have to leverage this unity and act decisively. We must fire on all cylinders of both engines to navigate this existential threat."
Good evening. The White House sent an unequivocally strong signal today that the U.S. president plans to follow through on his punishing tariffs on Canada on Saturday, which would be a massive and crippling hit to Canadian businesses.
Trump's 25% tariff threat on all Canadian imports has shocked North America, risking a full-blown trade war between two of the world's closest allies. But Canada isn't backing down. Prime Minister Trudeau has vowed dollar-for-dollar retaliation, warning that everything is on the table. With billions in trade, millions of jobs, and even U.S.-Canada security cooperation at risk, could this be the breaking point for one of the strongest alliances in modern history?
The mission this Wednesday night to escape U.S. tariffs.
Show us the respect. Shut your border.
What the Trump administration is demanding and how Canada is responding.
Should tariffs be imposed, we would retaliate.
As Ontario's premier kicks off his re-election campaign. The Bank of Canada's grim prediction if those tariffs take effect.
Monetary policy cannot offset this.
As the bank slashes its benchmark interest rate.
We will be looking to try to ensure that those kinds of things do not significantly impact Canadian workers, Canadian companies. But this is a process. People should get ready for a bit of a bumpy ride.
U.S. and Canada, two nations, share the world's longest undefended border, spanning nearly 9,000 kilometers. Their economies are deeply intertwined, with bilateral trade in goods and services totaling over $700 billion annually. This isn't just about numbers. It's about millions of jobs, countless businesses, and two economies that have grown together over decades. enter Donald Trump, the 45th President of the United States, whose America First agenda has consistently challenged traditional trade relationships. Trump's approach to international trade has been characterized by a willingness to use tariffs as a negotiating tool, even with long-standing allies. This strategy has already led to tensions with various trading partners, including China and the European Union. Now it seems Canada is squarely in the crosshairs. The current crisis began with Trump's threat to impose a 25% tariff on all Canadian goods entering the United States. This isn't a small, targeted measure. It's a broad stroke that would affect virtually every aspect of U.S. Canada trade. To put this in perspective, a 25% increase in the cost of Canadian goods would make many products uncompetitive in the U.S. market overnight. Industries from automotive to agriculture, from lumber to energy, would all feel the impact.
The February 1st date for Canada and Mexico still holds.
The White House reaffirmed in 4 days, 25% tariffs could be applied to all Canadian goods going into the U.S. That's despite the outreach and warnings from politicians on this side of the border that Americans will also feel the pain.
Trump's justification for these tariffs is twofold, and both reasons have raised eyebrows in Canada and among trade experts. First, he claims that Canada is allowing vast numbers of people to enter the United States illegally. This assertion is particularly surprising, given that the U.S. Canada border is known for its tight security cooperation. In fact, the two countries have long worked together on border issues, sharing intelligence and coordinating enforcement efforts. The second part of Trump's rationale is equally contentious. He alleges that Canada is facilitating the flow of fentanyl, a potent synthetic opioid, into the United States. This claim comes despite ongoing efforts by both countries to combat the opioid crisis, including joint law enforcement operations targeting drug trafficking.
For our provincial economy than the 2008 recession.
New money would likely require new legislation, and the business of the House of Commons is suspended until March 24th. Adding to the uncertainty.
Thanks so much for joining us.
Opposition parties say they'll vote no confidence in the minority Liberal government at the earliest opportunity.
Call the opposition leaders together if they're serious about it.
These justifications have left many observers puzzled. Traditionally, tariffs are used to address trade imbalances or protect domestic industries. Using them as a tool to address border security and drug trafficking issues is highly unusual and potentially in violation of international trade agreements. The potential impact of these tariffs on the Canadian economy cannot be overstated. Canada sends approximately 75% of its exports to the United States. A sudden 25% increase in the cost of these goods could lead to a significant drop in demand, potentially triggering a recession in Canada. Industries that rely heavily on exports to the U.S., such as the auto sector, could face plant closures and massive job losses. But the effects wouldn't be confined to Canada. The U.S. economy, too, would feel the impact. Many U.S. industries rely on Canadian inputs for their products. Suddenly increasing the cost of these inputs by 25% could lead to higher prices for American consumers, potential job losses in U.S. manufacturing, and disruptions to finely tuned supply chains that have been optimized over decades. Faced with this existential threat to its economy, Canada's response has been both measured and firm. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, speaking at a news conference in Montebello, Quebec, made it clear that while Canada's preference is to avoid a trade war, it is prepared to respond forcefully if necessary. Trudeau's proposed countermeasure is what he calls matching retaliatory tariffs. This means that for every dollar of tariffs the U.S. imposes on Canadian goods, Canada would impose an equal amount on U.S. goods. It's a tit-for-tat approach that signals Canada's unwillingness to back down in the face of U.S. pressure.
There cannot be tariffs without consequences. There cannot be tariffs without impact. And there cannot be tariffs with a higher cost for U.S. consumers.
If those warnings don't work, the federal government is preparing counter tariffs plus a stimulus package to help businesses and Canadians. No specific programs have been designed, but sources tell CTV News they could reach pandemic levels. The plan doesn't need to launch as soon as tariffs are levied on Canadian products. Instead, it will address the economic impacts as they become apparent.
We're going to see an unprecedented attack
to our families, to our businesses, to our communities.
Other premiers appear to be on board, as long as whatever money collected from counter tariffs goes to those who need it most.
That they treat this as seriously as they did the COVID response. And for our part here in British Columbia, that we will fill in the gaps to make sure that British Columbians are protected.
In an interview on Bloomberg's Big Take podcast, former finance minister and current leadership contender Chrystia Freeland said Canada needs to publish a list of American products we could slap with counter tariffs to get President Trump's attention.
I believe that he doesn't care that much if Canadian politicians are jumping around, banging our fists on the table, etc., but he cares about Americans.
Now, any stimulus package would have to be passed through Parliament, which is prorogued until March 24th. While opposition parties have promised to bring down the government, today the NDP left the door open to supporting the Liberals in order to pass relief measures.
The concept of dollar-for-dollar matching is significant for several reasons. First, it demonstrates Canada's resolve. Despite being the smaller economy, Canada is showing it's willing to stand its ground. Second, it provides a clear and simple principle for retaliation, making it easier for the Canadian public and international observers to understand and support. Finally, it leaves the door open for de-escalation. If the U.S. reduces its tariffs, Canada can proportionally reduce its own. But Trudeau didn't stop at matching tariffs. His statement that everything is on the table suggests that Canada is considering a range of potential responses. This could include measures beyond simple tariffs, such as challenging U.S. actions through international trade bodies, seeking support from other trading partners, or even leveraging Canada's role in continental defense and intelligence sharing. Trudeau's promise of a response that would be robust and rapid and measured, but very strong, is carefully worded. It suggests that while Canada is prepared to act decisively, it also wants to avoid unnecessary escalation. The inclusion of the word measured indicates a desire to keep the response proportional and potentially leave room for negotiation.
If the 25% tariffs are imposed, the federal government is considering a pandemic-like relief package for workers and companies, as first reported by the Globe and Mail. A source told Global News it will ultimately depend on the extent of Trump's decision.
We don't need Canada for that.
COVID-19 supports cost the economy hundreds of billions of dollars, and American tariffs could too.